On this episode of Game Shack, I review the original AtGames Ultimate Legend cabinet. Coming up next. It's not good. Hey everybody, welcome back on into the Game Shack. I'm your host, JDV. All right, before I get into the review of the original AtGames Ultimate cabinet, let me address real quick. A lot of people have been asking me if I'm going to do a tutorial series on building my virtual pinball game, and the answer to that question is yes. I should have the first episode up of that in a day or two, maybe 3. Okay, so let's get right into the review. But let me get to the good of this. First of all, I bought this unit used for $300. It is one of the original cabinets that they put out about 2.5 to 3 years ago now. It has firmware 1.011 on it, which I believe is the original firmware on it. It is very, very basic. About the only thing you can adjust on the game is when you're playing arcade games, you can turn the scan line on and off. That's about it. You can, even though there is a button on the arcade game that says control mapping, you cannot actually map any of the controls. All it does is kind of let you know what the buttons do. You can't actually remap things, which is really a bummer because in games like Tron, you really need to remap those controller buttons because the way you have to play, your hands have to be, all spread out and everything like that. So that's a little bit of a bummer. It's even more of a bummer, though, that you cannot adjust the aspect ratio or do anything else in terms of contrast or brightness to the screen. Anything that you would maybe expect to be able to have, even in a Gen 1 firmware, there's some things there that are missing. But in terms of the positive, there are some positives. It comes with 300 games, and it's a nice wide variety of games, from side-scrolling fighters to vertical shooter games, maze games, driving games. There's a tennis game on there. There's a large variety of stuff on there, and by and large, the games all do work, and generally speaking, the controls are laid out well. Asteroids is a game that I'd like to be able to use the spinner on as opposed to the joystick, and again, you can't remap them. The real plus for this system, though, of course, is its mighty control deck. As I want to play games like Tempest and Warlords and Breakout using a really good spinner. And as it turns out, the spinner on this game is absolutely legit, which is one of the reasons why I got this to start, is because I wanted to have that spinner, and the spinner works really well. What works less well is the trackball. It's nowhere near as fluid as you want, and I've gone in and I've tried to adjust it from, supposedly you can adjust the screws, 2 screws underneath. It really doesn't do anything. It's just not a very good trackball. But it is a trackball. It does work, and you can work Millipede and Missile Command, the 2 primary games that I would play with a trackball. You can use that, and you can also use the spinner in that game, which I actually end up doing most of the time, and then make micro adjustments with the trackball. So that's good. The controllers, I love the buttons on it. I mean, the buttons are absolutely great. I think the joysticks are great. I understand that really high-end players might want to replace that stuff, but personally, they blow away what's on Arcade 1-Ups games, and it's very well done. The screen is much bigger than Arcade 1-Up. And more importantly, even than that to me, is the fact that the control deck is wide. This game is probably the widest game that you can buy right now. It's wider than Arcade. It's wider than Arcade 1-Up. It's going to be wider, I guess, than the Mini that's coming out. So it's really cool in that regard, that you can get two full-size men in front of this machine, and lo and behold, you'll have room. And the screen is nice, even though you can't adjust it. It has some okay artwork and everything. I've already kind of connected my Nintendo Wii to it, which you can do because it has 2 HDMI inputs right on the front. You hit an input button, and bam, you're playing your Xbox or Wii or even a Blu-ray or DVD player. The game also features a rewind function, just like in the newer versions, but unfortunately it only works for a few games. What else? It's tall. You can see I'm about 6'2", and you can still, is still fairly comfortable. I might build a little riser for it at some point, but realistically, the width of the cabinet, the height of the cabinet, the controllers on the cabinet, the screen on the cabinet, basic fit and finish on the cabinet are all outstanding. There are some notable omissions in terms of video games, because there's a lot of Atari 2600 games. Now, I'm a giant fan of that system. I own probably 4 or 5 of them. I don't own every Atari game ever made, but I'm attempting to own every cartridge. I own a lot of them, and I've checked out a lot of emulators, including emulators from AtGames. The emulators on this are okay. There's some of them, like Adventure, the sound is off. So you'll pick up a sword, blink, you pick it up, blink. So there's like a noticeable half-second to a second delay on some of the sound. But on the positive side, I'm glad that there are so many Atari games. It is a good thing to me to have. Now, I wish that there were some better arcade titles on here. We do get Burger Time, we get Tetris, we get Missile Command, we get Millipede, Tempest, Warlords, so we do get some classics in there, and there's also, of course, the cool factor of anytime you have a multi-cade that has a bunch of more rare or niche type games is the kind of, I remember playing that game if you're older, or, well, geez, I better play this game because I paid for it, and this is actually not a bad game. All that said, it is missing all Activision games. As far as I know, there are no Activision Atari games on here, so there's no Pitfall, there's no Hero, there's no Demon Attack. Those are pretty big omissions, but even really, in my mind, bigger than that is there's no Space Invaders, there's no arcade Space Invaders, and there's no Atari Space Invaders. Now, Atari Space Invaders might be the greatest port of all time, and for them not to have it on here when they do have it on their other systems is a little bizarre to me. Be aware that, and now we get to the negatives, be aware that AtGames is completely not supporting the first versions of this cabinet, as in not one bit. And that's because you cannot get online. You cannot get online using Ethernet or Wi-Fi, both of which work on this system. Even though I bought it used, and even though it's a little rough around the edges, everything works. The control deck works. It can see the internet. It can see either Ethernet or Wi-Fi, but it will, for whatever reason, this firmware just cannot cope with, maybe modern signals or whatever, but it will not go online. Even though I put in my password, I reset the system, I did everything that I could do. I looked up Reddit threads, I wrote AtGames several emails describing the problem of, not being able to get firmware, and what they said to me is try using Ethernet as opposed to Wi-Fi. Well, I did try that. I tried several different cords, I tried different locations. I even had a guy from Spectrum, a cable company, look at it and inspect it, and he's like, well, it's the machine, it's not your signal. So I emailed them back and said, hey, this isn't working. Do you have any other solutions for this product that is barely more than 3 years old for me? And I have gotten nothing but silence from them. You guys might be saying, well, you bought a used machine, you get what you get. Yeah, I understand that. That's why I'm not going to complain to them about the marquee going fritzing in and out. Okay, I understand that. I wouldn't complain if the button was broken. If the internet worked on it, if I could upgrade the firmware, I'd probably give this thing a mighty, mighty grade. But as it is, I can only give it 2. What I am unhappy about is that a major functionality of this game simply does not work anymore because of decisions that the company has made. So 2 out of 5 is the best I could do for this. I would not pay any more than $200 or $300 for this game if you see it. I don't care if it's mint. I don't care if it's new in a store, a demo model, or whatever that's never been turned on. You are really, really limited right now. If anybody knows anybody at AtGames, if you know of a link that I can go to try to change the firmware, if there's something really stupid like holding down, I don't know, push the joystick right, spin the spinner, and hold start or something. If there's something really stupid that I'm not doing, please let me know. But I've exhausted all avenues. I've contacted them several times. I don't know what else to do. It looks like I have just a Gen 1, AtGames cab, which to be fair, is not bad. I would pay $300 for it for no other reason because I can mod it and it's a beautiful cabinet. One other question I have, if anybody knows, will the standalone decks, will they connect into a first gen? So if I wanted to replace this controller deck with the standalone 2-player decks that they sell, will that work? I don't know, because no one at AtGames would answer my questions. Hey, if you like this kind of content, please give it a thumbs up. It helps me put out more content. Love each other. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the Game Shack. Mwah!
Be sure to visit evilgeniusentertainment.com for exclusive content, swag, casting call news, and much, much more.